Hello, I am Cataline Parrott, and this is for American Studies Intro into Pop Culture. So, the Industrial Revolution gave birth to not only pop culture but also the single story. The single story is detrimental to society, but can be changed and even eliminated if society focuses on three learning theories, which are Walter Fischl and narrative theory, social learning theory, and the cultivation theory. So if we look back at the Industrial Revolution, we can see that America was becoming way more advanced. Technologically, it gave a lot of people free time to do what they want since they didn't have to constantly be working in these factories. And with that, it gave them time to come up with stories and spread their ideas. Just be creative, as said. And in the book, Pop Culture in American History, in Chapter 1, it explains that Edgar Allan Poe was very inspired by a lot of newspaper articles he would read about gruesome murders that took place in the 19th century. The way these articles portrayed the murders were very gruesome, very detailed. They did not skimp on the bloody gore in the 19th century. People needed to be entertained. And Edgar Allan Poe, he took these and refined them. He made them into stories of his own. He adapted them, if you want to say that. And he expressed these stories. That was his form of communicating them. Matter of fact, it even explains that one of the newspaper stories could not explain how this person died. So they took specifically a story that Edgar Allan Poe wrote and put it in the newspaper because they needed to tell the story. People needed to know. People craved that information. They needed these stories to tell them what they needed to know. If we go on, social learning theory and the cultivation theory both help to explain the single story. The social learning theory is that we learn from observation. The cultivation theory says what we are exposed to over time becomes the full truth, which is pretty much the same thing. In a TED Talk called Danger of the Single Story, given by, and I know I'm going to butcher her name, so I apologize, but Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, she explained that when she was a kid, she only had certain types of books, and these books exposed her to little girls with white skin and blue eyes, with straight hair, and they looked nothing like her. But because she saw this is what she grew to believe. She was only exposed to this. So it gave her the idea of the single story, that only people in the world are represented like this. Of course, she goes on to say that as she grew up, she was exposed to other books that give her a more even representation of who she is and all the people in the world. But the single story can easily be destroyed if what we observe is more than just what we're comfortable with. And over time, what we are exposed to becomes the full truth. So if people expose themselves to more than just the ordinary, then single stories wouldn't be a problem. People would be able to just not have these stereotypes, because stereotypes come out of single stories, and the more you expose yourself to stuff that you don't usually see, the more that these single stories will be eliminated. It also talks about, if we take a look at semantics, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, but it's the way we analyze stories, which is through signs and symbols. And in pop culture, there are plenty of signs and symbols that are recognizable and familiar to a lot of people in American culture. And these signs and symbols are directly related to what American culture wants you to think. So when you look at a movie and you see these superheroes that are big, buff, handsome, and you see these villains that are ugly with foreign accents, it's what the American culture wants you to think, that to be a hero, you must be big, tough, strong, and handsome. And if you're different, then you're the villain. It also, if we look at American culture, we can see that the duality myth is clearly out there and just in everybody's mind. And the duality myth is pretty much the outlaw hero and the official hero. A character embodies both. The outlaw hero is someone who lives by their own rules. They're free. They do what they please. And the official hero is the one who's noble, who does stuff morally right and for others. And it kind of just goes back to the want for people to fit in, but also to stand out. And in everyday society, everyone wants to fit in. They want to be accepted by the people around them. They don't want to be hated, but they also want to stand out. They want to show that they're better than everybody else. And in the book, The Signs of Life in the USA, Christine Folch explains that during the Industrial Revolution, there was a disenchantment in America. So she talked about how there was a disenchantment in the America, and to re-enchant this, people became super obsessed with sci-fi and fantasy. It gave them an escape from the real world. And I think that's what the duality myth does to everyone, is that it re-enchants their life. They want to see a character that is relatable, that embodies them, but they also want to see something fantastical, someone who's more powerful than them, because that's what everyone strives to be. Moving on to section 2, I am going to analyze Deadpool 2. It's the second movie adaptation of 2018 of the popular comic book character Deadpool. And it shows much about the American culture and what we represent. So if we take a look at the signs and the symbols, the music in the beginning is very soft and relaxing. But when it's paired with the aggressive action and the cuss words, it gives us the impression that this movie is going to be an action comedy. Again, with the Marvel logo in the middle of the trailer, it lets us know that this is a superhero movie, and it's from a well-credited studio. People, when they think of superheroes, they think of either DC or Marvel, and they know that these characters are popular, so they expect a good movie. If you think about it, this is like ethos. We see a reliable, well-credited movie, so we're like, okay, you know what, we're gonna give this movie a shot because it is well-credited. They also show a kid in the trailer, and he's helpless. It evokes pathos of a feel a need to protect this child. And then we see Wayne's girlfriend, Deadpool's girlfriend, suggesting that he should take care of him. A maternal instinct, the woman who represents the motherly nature in all us women. The amount of blood and guns and swords also lets the audience know that this is not for a young audience. It is for adults. Wouldn't want those youngins seeing any of that blood and guts. And then again, Ryan Reynolds, a big sign in himself, is a popular handsome actor who looks ugly in the trailer, possibly giving the message that it doesn't really matter how you look, only your personality. It also says that audience should pay more attention to what he says, not how he looks. So again, he wears this big red suit, giving the impression too that you shouldn't bother with how he looks. It's how he acts. If we analyze this in a narrative form, we can see that the moral is that you need to fight for what's right no matter what. A moral that we see in a lot of superhero movies. It is more nailed in when you get the quote, "Doing the right thing is messy, but if you want to fight for what's right, sometimes you have to fight dirty." By showing this as the moral, it locks in the fact that Deadpool is not the enemy. It also shows the audience that the right thing may be harder to do, but it's worth it. The moral that always do what's right. Even though it's hard, you gotta do it. If we analyze this in a dramatic form, the rule-breaking behavior we see is killing people, which, for the most part, is a universal message, a universal thing that is looked down upon. But he's forgiven because he is doing it to protect a kid and his friends. A form of transcendence, if you will, because he's doing this for a higher calling. The higher calling? Love for friends and children. The quote, "I ain't letting cable kill this kid," again nails in the fact that he is doing this because he is protecting this child. He is killing and doing all this stuff to protect an innocent being. All the trailer shows that America wants us to see a character that embodies the duality myth. Earth. Deadpool is a vigilante and therefore has both the outlaw and the official hero in him. The audience wants to see themselves in the character. A guy who is in love, who's just trying to protect those he loves, he needs. But at the same time, he is powerful, and he plays by his own rules. Also, Folch, in The Signs of Life, that explained earlier, explains that fantasy is very popular because it re-enchants America, and people are so stuck in their rational way of thinking that the superhero genre gives them this escape from the reality, the fantastic. So looking into my own influence from pop culture, I remember going to see the movie Logan, and it was right after my grandpa died, and so I was still dealing with a lot of death. And watching that movie, it was full of a lot of death, more than I was expecting. And so the Walter Fischl narrative theory, it plays in my mind every time I think of that story, because storytelling is the universal form of communication, and that whole movie was expressing that death is natural. Death is a thing that everyone has to deal with. And so it made me think of my own experience with my grandpa and his death, and it made me realize that it's fine. That whole movie just made a weight lift off my shoulders. I felt as though these stories help people through so many things, and storytelling is just a way to communicate, the way to make people feel better, the way to make just people feel that they are more than what they really are. And going in a different direction also, I think what also really stands out to me about just how pop culture has influenced my life is the fact that Christine Folch, her essay really stood out to me, that America does just crave the fantasy and sci-fi, and I think that's why I am so obsessed. It made me realize why I'm so obsessed with this anime and this fantasy and fiction. It's because my whole life, school has only taught structure, math, all this stuff that's so critically just drilled in our minds, and there's very little time to think of this fantastic. But I think that's why I strive to look at the fantastic, the fantasy, the sci-fi, is because I myself want to be a part of it.